5.5 hours away from our anticipated splashdown.
Yeah, that first event that we have coming up will be claw separation. That is in preparation to jettison the trunk, and we are 4 hours and 38 minutes away from that. So we hope you stick with us as we continue to bring coverage of everything going on so far. Like Dan said, Bob and Doug are awake, and they are completing their post-sleep phase, although I guess they're probably out of it by now since it's been more than an hour since they've been woken up. But yeah, so they are getting ready to come on home, and we're looking forward to having them.
All right, and we are continuing to take your questions on Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. I think we can get through a couple more real quick right now. This one comes from Ganga Prabha, who wants to know, will Dragon take more than 2 astronauts in the future? It absolutely will, in fact, in the very near future. We're already counting down the days once this mission is complete to Crew 1. That'll be the first operational flight in a Crew Dragon spacecraft, and there will be 4 crew members on board. And it'll be our first multinational crew to fly on this new capable vehicle. We'll have to do some work between the end of Demo-2 and that flight just to get everything certified and ready to go. But that crew has already been in training for several months, even years now for a couple of them. And we're looking forward to them flying as early as late September.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I've been at SpaceX for 5.5 years now, and to be able to say that we're coming up to our first fully operational mission is incredible. Yeah, my job is to work the certification element of our human spaceflight with NASA, and it's just mind-boggling and that we're at the point where for so many years we've been getting ready for things like Demo-1 and Demo-2, and the fact that Crew 1 is knocking on our doorstep already is amazing. It's a really exciting time.
All right, our next one comes from Annie, who wants to know, is the Crew Dragon trunk reusable?
That's a good question. Right now, it is not. It would be amazing to have a 100% reusable vehicle. Of course, the first stage and the inner stage, we have a number of flight-proven missions for our first stage and inner stage. Unfortunately, the trunk is not something that we are able to reuse. We will be reusing the Dragon capsules themselves, but after Dragon capsule separates from the International Space Station as it prepares for re-entry, we will jettison that trunk, and it will disintegrate in the Earth's atmosphere as it re-enters. We do this because we need to expose the heat shield at the bottom of the Dragon capsule in order to have a safe landing. Also, the trunk is responsible for carrying the solar panels, which provide power to the Dragon capsule throughout flight. So since we will be coming home soon, and even in the event of a wave-off scenario where we have to delay after departure from the International Space Station, and we have to delay for whatever reason, that trunk would still be able to provide the necessary power through those solar panels. But yeah, so the short answer is the Dragon trunk is not reusable at this point, although that would be nice because we wouldn't have to build it.
Dragon for inventory.
Go ahead, Dragon, with the inventory.
Hey, Solo, good to hear your voice this morning. Let's start with location 9. So from bag 204, we consumed 2 additional waters, so bag 204 is now empty. From location 10, we consumed 2 more waters from 208, so bag 208 is now empty, and then 1 additional from 207. So 207 has 2 water bottles remaining.
Okay, SpaceX copies. Bag 204 took away 2 waters, which is now empty. Bag 208, 2 waters down, now empty. And bag 207, 1 water down and 2 remaining.
Good read back. For location 12, from bag 315, 1 breakfast. I'm sorry, from location 11, bag 315, 1 breakfast. And then from location 12, bag 319, 1 breakfast.
Okay, Bob, we copy one breakfast down from bag 315 and one breakfast down from bag 319. It is also great to hear you guys as well, and a request to come back aboard when you're able.
Okay, so we'll give you a call here in just a couple minutes to come back on board.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Bob.
All right, so that exchange right there real quick was really just an inventory. Believe it or not, one of the hardest things about spaceflight is just keeping track of everything. Things tend to float around and get lost in microgravity pretty easily. There's a couple of stories of wanted posters for items on board the International Space Station when they go missing. And even on the station, which much bigger than just the Crew Dragon itself, they have very intricate system to track everything through RFID and very meticulous ground annotations like we were just hearing read off. So if a crew member ever gets in a situation where they need to find something, you have people dedicated here on the ground who will know exactly where that is. It always kind of blows me away when you can give them an item and they can tell you it's in this rack, in this bag, this is also in that bag. This is exactly where you will find it.
Yeah, that would be a very extensive list, especially for the items on board the International Space Station. What they were reporting there was essentially what they've consumed, both liquid and food, over the last couple of hours, just documenting their fluid intake and the meal consumption. Also, that to translate that request to come back on board, that is requesting permission to let the cameras turn back on, of course, for privacy reasons during the sleep phase and their wake up, the post-sleep phase, as they're waking up and stretching their legs. The cameras are turned off for the crew privacy. So that was just our core here in Mission Control requesting to have those cameras turned back on.
So hopefully we get some views over their shoulder or just inside the cabin in just a little bit. But again, for Bob and Doug, they're finishing up that post-sleep period. And so they're really just going to be kind of getting their house in order, really getting Dragon ready for that reentry. They'll have some steps just to get suited up and get positioned into the Dragon space, inside Dragon itself, where they're going to be monitoring the deorbit burn, all the different events on their touchscreen displays. They're going to be able to see changes in orbit, changes in velocity, all just the really critical bits of data to tell them how the performance of these burns and these different activities are going. They're going to be able to tell exactly what orbit they're on and see when it lines up with the coast or with the ocean just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, a little bit later. They'll largely be in a monitor mode, as Dragon is designed to fly autonomously and kind of guide itself back, but they are in the loop, essentially, where they could jump in and be that backup capability if required.
Yeah, as Dan said, that they'll be putting their suits back on here shortly. We only have them wear the suits for the more dynamic phases whenever they are inside the capsule. So obviously we want them to have that on as they re-enter the atmosphere. So they'll put it on well before we begin those deorbit sequences. That being said, they were able to sleep. Therefore, they were able to sleep not in their suits and comfortably in their chairs with a little bit more wiggle room there. Something else to note that we have coming up, hopefully, like Dan said, we'll get some of those camera views coming from inside the cabin. And we'll, like I mentioned before, something that I really like being able to see is the shot between the two of them, looking at the actual display panels themselves. We'll actually be able to see what they're seeing on their screens as they are monitoring all the telemetry and data and attitude information as the capsule is re-entering the atmosphere. So we are going to continue to take your questions through hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. Our next question comes from Christian. What ensures that the capsule does not melt upon re-entry? Please explain the thermal protection. Yeah, that's a great question. One of my personal favorite pieces of hardware on our Dragon capsules is the heat shield. Part of my job is to work with NASA to certify the heat shield, and so I am very lucky that I get to work.
SpaceX Dragon, you're cleared to come aboard anytime.
All right.
Okay, Doug, copy. Welcome aboard. We should get that in work shortly. In addition, as able, when you're ready, request your game plan for fluid loading water. This corresponds to section 3 of 4.700.
So that call out that we heard there was inviting us to turn the cameras back on inside the capsule.
Okay, I think our plan is as prescribed. And then I will be drinking water out of the other corresponding, probably all 3 of those bottles, and Bob's probably going to have to break into his corresponding bag, as well as potentially one more in volume 10.
Okay, copy, Doug. So basically, we were saying the bottles you expect to remove are the ones you just spoke about during breakfast, as well as one additional one from Volume 10. Is that an accurate statement?
Negative. I think it's going to be one more bag full from each side.
Okay, copy. We'll probably tag up with you after fluid loading complete just to verify. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good, Mike. I think that's probably best because it might be somewhat variable, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Okay, copy. Thank you.
So that conversation there about fluid loading, the official space way of saying drink your water, making sure that Bob and Doug will remain hydrated throughout the re-entry period. If you fly on airplanes, if you do your research, it's important to stay hydrated while you're flying on airplanes due to the different pressures. Your body tends to lose a little bit more water, and so it's important to continue to drink water to stay hydrated. Same here for Bob and Doug. You heard them mention as surprise. Oh, there we can see them in their capsule. There is Doug Hurley there reading his instructions. Looks like Bob is there to your right. Looks like he's wearing a blue sweatshirt there, drinking some water. So they're just checking to make sure. There's the back of Doug's head. Just to make sure that they are drinking enough water. You heard them mention as prescribed. That means that our flight surgeon is prescribing them how much water they should be drinking, whether or not they should be taking salt tablets to help them retain that water as they are making their journey back home. So
here's that view we've talked about a couple of times, looking directly over their shoulders. And so you have those 3 main touchscreen displays, and they can configure them in a number of different modes. It looks like the one they have in the middle is giving them their trajectory. They had one on the right that was looking at a lot of the different control systems, and they get everything from current velocity, altitude. They can get deep insight into their life support system, all of the pyrotechnics on board, all of the different things of the Dragon spacecraft. Those displays are really their window into it. You'll also notice a couple of illuminated buttons underneath the touchscreens. Some of the really critical functions that require immediate action get a button dedicated to them. For example, they have buttons for a number of the pyro events on board the Dragon spacecraft, like parachute deploy, or the ability to cut those parachutes once they splash down in the water. And so they're going to get these configured, and this is going to be how they track the progress of their flight home today.
Yeah, if we get that view back between their heads, on the left-hand side of the screen, there we go. The left-hand side of your screen there is actually the control display that they'll be using for the re-entry, for the deorbit burn. There's a bunch of information that'll be displayed there, like trajectory details, such as entry angle and capsule perigee, and how much distance is remaining between the current time and whenever that deorbit burn is terminated. A lot of really important information there for them. They'll also be able to see which of the 4 Draco thrusters are firing at any given time during that deorbit burn. So that's we'll probably see that particular screen on both of their screens during that phase of the mission. So going back to the previous question that we had from #AskNASA, came to us from Christian. He asked, what ensures that the capsule does not melt upon re-entry? Please explain thermal protection. I was just saying that my job here as a SpaceX engineer, I have the awesome opportunity to work with our heat shield experts, both on the SpaceX side and NASA's heat shield experts, and really get the stamp of approval to use the hardware for flight. It is, you can think of it kind of like a pizza. There is the base of the heat shield, or the shape, the structure, and that's made out of carbon fiber. And that you can think of that as the crust. We then apply a coating to it that allows the individual heat shields, the individual tiles of the heat shield themselves, to stick to the structure itself. So what we use to adhere it, you can think of as the sauce, and you can think of those tiles as the pepperoni pieces on your pizza. So it's kind of a different way to explain it, but that's how I like to think of it. The heat shield, again, is responsible for really protecting the capsule. Those temperatures will get up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, so pretty toasty. We will, I'm sure, have a great shot of our toasted marshmallow back on the recovery vessel once it splashes down. But yeah, so that heat shield does the bulk of the thermal protective work. There are, of course, panels on the exterior of the Dragon capsule. I mentioned toasted marshmallow. Those white panels that are on the exterior will also become brown as it re-enters the atmosphere and begins to char due to all of the heat and the plasma buildup. So really good question. Of course, with all those external temperatures getting so hot, it is important to keep Bob and Doug comfortable in their return. There will be cool nitrox purging through the cabin of the capsule itself, as well as through their suits. Anytime the telemetry, anytime the suits detect that the internal suit temperature is getting too high, I think the threshold is 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll purge the suit with some cold air, so Bob and Doug will remain comfortable throughout their journey back through the Earth's atmosphere.
Pizza and marshmallows. Now I'm hungry. Thank you, Kate. All right, our next question comes from Kevin, who wanted to know, when does Dragon start its deorbit burn? And we can give you the exact time down to the second of when it's targeted. Right now, it's at 10:56 and 45 seconds Pacific. And then if you convert that over to Greenwich Mean Time, 17:56 and 45 seconds. Yeah,
so we're just under 4.5 hours until we begin that deorbit burn. So, Kevin, if you're looking to take a little bit of a nap between now and deorbit, you've got a little bit of time. Our next question comes to us from W. Stelmack. The question is, can you become taller after spending a long time in space? Great question. The answer is yes. Due to the lack of strong gravity pull on the human body, we have found that astronauts actually report growing in length due to the fact that their body isn't being compressed in this direction, vertically, according to our orientation on the Earth's surface. Because there's lack of gravity compressing the body, we do see reports of the astronauts saying that they got a little taller in space.
Yeah, you can kind of think about it where you've been told you're the tallest when you first wake up because you've been horizontal the whole time. And it is a temporary getting taller. Once they return back to Earth, they shrink back down pretty quick. But keep sending in your questions using the hashtag AskNASA. As Kate just said, we still have a few more hours until we get to the deorbit burn, which is when things really start to pick up. Just to run down a couple of those milestones again for you. Prior to the deorbit burn, we have to get rid of Dragon's trunk. And so what we'll be doing is first doing a slew or a maneuver to alter Dragon's attitude and then just get it ready for this trunk separation. That's scheduled to happen right at about 10:48 a.m. Pacific, 17:48 GMT. After Dragon's in the correct attitude, it'll first separate the claw, which is the connecting point between the trunk and the capsule itself, followed shortly after by the trunk. The trunk's scheduled to separate at 10:51 a.m. Pacific, 17:51 GMT. And then after the trunk has been separated, we get into the proper deorbit burn for that final burn that's going to be sending them on home.
Yeah, that burn will last about 11 and a half minutes, and we'll be using the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. Once the deorbit burn completes, we'll no longer need to utilize or fire those particular thrusters, so we will close the nose cone, protecting them as well as the forward hatch from reentry conditions. About 20 minutes after that, the fun stuff begins. At 11:36 a.m. Pacific or 18:36 Universal Time, we will have an expected loss of signal, communications blackout. That will last about 6 minutes. During that time, we won't be able to command Dragon or receive telemetry or communicate with the crew. That being said, Dragon is designed to be completely autonomous. It is steering itself at that point anyway. That blackout will last, like I said, for 6 minutes. In the middle of there, or just a couple minutes after that blackout period begins, we will have what's known as entry interface. This is when the capsule is really beginning to enter the Earth's atmosphere, is beginning to feel the friction and the aerodynamic forces associated with hitting that atmosphere. We'll get those communications back at 11:42 a.m. Pacific or 18:42 Universal. Just 2 minutes after we get communications back, we will have the drogue chute deployment. There are 3 smaller drogue parachutes that will pop out at 11:44 a.m. Pacific, and those are designed to continue to slow the capsule down further beyond what the slowing of the capsule from the atmosphere. Those drogue chutes will continue to slow it down. Those drogue chutes will release about a minute later, and we will see those main parachutes deploy. 4 orange and white big old parachutes will come out and continue to further decelerate the vehicle. At that point, it will be going from 350 miles per hour. So originally, the velocity during the deorbit phase, while on station, is 17,500 miles per hour. As it continues to rotate around Earth, still going that fast, will come down to 350 miles per hour. As it re-enters the atmosphere, the parachutes will further decelerate it to a mere 15 or 16 miles per hour as it touches down into the Atlantic Ocean. We are anticipating that splashdown to occur at 11:48 a.m. Pacific or 18:48 Universal. And at that point in time, our recovery operations will begin. And that is something that we are all very excited to see.
Yeah, I mean, the clock starts ticking almost from the moment they hit the water, and the teams move to work extremely quickly, but also keeping safety kind of at the forefront of everything that they're doing. This is the first time we've returned a crew to a splashdown since Apollo, since the very last Apollo mission, the Apollo-Soyuz test project back in July of 1975. So it's something we haven't done in a long time, but it's something that we've definitely rehearsed many times for this moment, including on our demonstration flight just last year. So the teams are going to move in extremely quickly within the first couple of minutes of splashdown just to get the capsule itself safe and ready to get lifted up onto the recovery vessel. The Go Navigator has left the port at this point and is currently making its way out to that splashdown zone at Pensacola. So it'll be there ready and waiting, about 40-plus people on board, standing by to help bring Dragon onto the boat itself and get the crew out of the capsule.
Yeah. It's an exciting day. Like I said, we're about 4.5 hours away from those events, that deorbit burn from occurring. So we have a little bit of time. We will continue
SpaceX for heat exchanger bypass.
Go ahead, SpaceX.
Okay, in preparation for entry, we'll be commanding the heat exchanger bypass close, so this will mean that manual control of cabin temperature will be disallowed. That commanding should come in shortly.
Okay, copy that. Thanks, Mike.
No problem. In addition, we do not expect to need to elevate the loop speed for pre-chill.
Oh, okay, copy that. Thank you.
So right there, they're just doing a couple of housekeeping steps as, again, they're going to be conditioning the inside of the cabin and Doug and Bob's suits for that actual reentry. They're going to be cooling down the inside of the cabin and doing what's known as a suit purge. So once Bob and Doug are suited up and in their seats, they'll do basically a flush with with cooler air, with cooler nitrox flowing into their suits. They're not pressurized while they're suited up. They'll just leave a zipper open a little bit. They will do suit leak checks, which will see them pressurize the suits completely, as, again, those suits designed to protect them in the event of a cabin depressurization, any contaminants in the atmosphere, things like that. But they will be wearing them for this dynamic phase, which I know we have a question here from Nick, who had wanted to know, do the seats recline to allow them to lie flat during sleep, or do they sleep upright? And the suits and the seats, kind of an integrated system. The seats themselves, as Kate described a little bit earlier, are rigid carbon fiber. So the seats do move, as we saw on launch day, where they're able to both recline and decline, but the seats themselves don't move. And really, when you're in outer space, you can't get the sensation of laying down. So the seats reclining don't really do much for you when you're in microgravity. Pretty much any surface on the Dragon spacecraft will serve as a bed. The same thing kind of true on board the International Space Station, where if we have more crew members than we have crew accommodations at times, crew members can just camp out. And if you've ever seen any of the photos from back in the shuttle days, when we would have 7 people in a relatively small enclosure, you can just essentially strap your sleeping bag to the wall, and that's your bed for the evening.
Yeah, so essentially in space, your body doesn't really have a reference to determine what is up and what is down, aside from, what you can determine visually. So in the case of whenever they're sleeping, their body can't really feel laying down. They just feel being in their seat. So while, like Dan said, the seats do actuate so that they're in launch position or landing position, where the entire seat is basically moving 40 degrees this way or that way, they don't necessarily recline out like a recliner chair would. So, although I'm sure that would also be very comfortable. Our next question, coming to us again from Twitter using the hashtag #AskNASA. Can you talk about the recovery ship? Absolutely, Rose. Like I mentioned before, this is the second opportunity that we've had to highlight the recovery team, given the fact that our water landings and needing to retrieve a crew is very new to our company here. We're very excited to be able to highlight that team now for the second time on our webcast. The recovery team, the recovery ship is, there are actually 2 of them. We have one that is capable of assisting recoveries on the west coast of Florida, and that's the Go Navigator. That's what we will be using for today's recovery. There's also the Go Searcher, which is located on the East Coast for East Coast landings. They are identical, and they are able to be staffed, fully staffed, not only for recovery operations, but for medical as well.
SpaceX Dragon, we're putting the grab sample container collection in work.
Okay, SpaceX copies grab sample container collection in work. Good luck.
And that right there, they'll occasionally...
And so it'll be serial number 2088.
Okay, SpaceX copies serial number 2088.
That exchange right there real quick. The crew members on board Dragon, something they do on board the station as well, take occasional air samples. You heard them call it the grab sample, where they're basically taking these samples and sealing them up, and then they just get assessed back down on the ground. You're just constantly looking for what kind of atmosphere your crew members are in. As when you're in a spacecraft, it's an enclosed environment, so you have to worry about everything that gets put into that atmosphere stays there. So things like carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, any other contaminants can build up in an enclosed space and eventually become hazardous. So we have to have a lot of systems to help constantly scrub or clean those things out from the atmosphere. And we'll do these grab samples just to make sure that they're basically doing their job.
Yeah. Going going back to Rose's question coming to us from Twitter using the hashtag #AskNASA, asking us to talk about the recovery ship. Yes, so we have two identical recovery ships or vessels. Specifically to our recovery today, we are utilizing Go Navigator for our landing in the Gulf of Mexico. In addition to the recovery ship itself, there are also two fast boats. So those will be transported to the general location, about 3 nautical miles away from the landing site itself. Those fast boats will be deployed from the vessel, and they will make their way very quickly to the capsule itself. They'll wait a couple hundred feet away from the capsule as the initial sniffing tests are done. Those sniffing tests are intended to determine whether or not any toxic vapors from the hypergolic fuels on board. Hypergols are essentially propellants that whenever you put them in contact with each other, they ignite. So it is an ideal propellant used in space because you don't need an ignition source. You just combine the two and you have your reaction. So those fumes are toxic, and so the team will make sure that there aren't any of those floating around and make sure that it is safe to approach. Once they get that go for approach, they'll head over to the capsule and essentially someone that I'm really excited to see in action today will actually climb up on top of the capsule and attach the rigging equipment necessary to hoist the Dragon out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. So that should take about 30-35 minutes. And at that point, the recovery vessel will be in place. They'll be able to hook everything up, use the hydraulic crane to lift the capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel, get it settled comfortably in the nest. And at that point, we'll open up the hatch and say hi to Bob and Doug.
Yeah, and they'll almost immediately move into medical quarters on board the ship, as it has pretty much everything you need to outfit and sustain a crew of a little over 40 people. And then immediately over the Dragon capsule is the helideck, where they'll be landing a helicopter following recovery today, which is what's going to actually bring Bob and Doug back to shore. Next up, our question comes from Spinach, who wants to know, why do you need a heat shield on entry but not on ascent? Speed relative to atmosphere must be roughly equal in both cases.
Yeah, so that is a really good question. The short answer is it's all about directionality. So whenever we are launching the Dragon capsule, it's pointing upwards and it is heading towards the International Space Station. So the heat shield, or rather the bottom of the capsule, is not exposed and is not encountering any thermal differences or temperatures. During that ascent phase, also, it's important to note that while the capsule is actually going through the Earth's atmosphere, which is where you have atmosphere and therefore friction as you're moving through the atmosphere, and that's what causes the charring as we see upon reentry. The amount of friction that the capsule is experiencing as it is leaving the atmosphere to go to the International Space Station is a fraction of what it will encounter as it is re-entering. Also to note, the shape of the Dragon capsule is more aerodynamic at the top. So again, allowing it to cut through the atmosphere with minimal friction. So after the capsule detaches, and as we will see today, comes back down, that flat end is designed to encounter the atmosphere and slow it down. So it's kind of by intention the opposite effect. Yeah. We use the atmosphere to help slow us down safely, as opposed to wanting to escape Earth's gravity as efficiently as possible. So we want to cut through it as much as possible.
All right, next up is a question from Casey, who wants to know, what will the crew be able to see out of the window upon re-entry? I think it was Bob who actually answered this a little bit earlier this week, where he recalled what he saw during his re-entries on the space shuttle, where when astronauts look out the window, they can see the ablative material of the heat shield. So the heat shield is designed so as parts really start to heat up, they actually kind of peel off, and that helps dissipate the heat, or the most intense part of the heat during re-entry. And for a crew member, it looks like just red bits of glowing material flying past your window. And for them in particular, there will be plasma building up around the spacecraft as it heats up to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And so out their window, they'll be able to see essentially some really bright orange, not quite flames, but definitely something that looks energetic. And that'll be their main view out of the window, which they'll have those windows open and uncovered during the reentry. Our next question comes from Jeff, who wants to know what's the longest someone has been in space. I know the cumulative record holder right now is a Russian cosmonaut, Gennady Vidalka. He's got a little over 800 days in space. He's been a long-duration crew member not only on the International Space Station, but also previously on the Russian Mir space station, which was really kind of the harbinger of long-duration spaceflight, where you had people up there living for months and months and months at a time.
I believe the current record holder, is it still Peggy Whitson?
Peggy Whitson is the American record holder right now. All right. Our next question comes from Timothy, who wants to know, is this the first splashdown since the Apollo missions? Yes, it is. This is the first U.S. splashdown since the Apollo missions. There was one Russian Soyuz. I'd have to go back and look up exactly which mission it was, but it technically did land in a frozen lake. So it was a splashdown, although unintentional. This is the first time we've splashed down American crew members, or at the very least, this is the first time we've done an ocean-based splashdown since Apollo. The last one being Apollo Soyuz back in July of 1975.
Our next question coming to us from Krishna. What wind speed does it take for the splashdown to get scrubbed? Ooh, that is a really good question. I can't recall exactly what it is off the top of my head, but I think it is no more than 15 miles per hour. Or I might be recalling a different
It was
constraint.
about 15 feet per second, which is about 10 miles an hour, was the range that we were looking to be under for this mission, which today we've said a couple of times the weather ended up being almost perfect for the splashdown. We have winds in the splashdown area of only about 1.5 miles per second. So very gentle winds there today, but for this particular mission, our constraint was about 15 feet per second, which is about 10 miles an hour.
Our next question coming to us from Danny. Again, this is using the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. Keep your questions coming. Question is, great stream, guys. Learning so much. Oh, awesome. Glad to hear. Thanks for the feedback. Would it be possible for the SpaceX capsule to be used again in future missions as it is, or would it need a complete overhaul before heading back up? Awesome question. So we absolutely have been aiming to reuse Dragon capsules from the very beginning. Initially, when we started reusing our Dragon cargo capsules, figuring out how to waterproof it was quite the challenge. And once we figured that out, we were actually able to reduce the amount of overhaul or refurbishment required between usage of the capsules. So that being said, things like the heat shield and the TPS or thermal protective system panels on the exterior of the capsule, those things generally, as of right now, would not be reused, but the guts and the brains of the capsule, most definitely. We aim to, and of course this process transforms over time. The more that we do it, we understand more, we learn more from data and tests, and we're able to make the process more efficient. And so eventually we will hopefully be able to get to absolutely no refurbishment required in order to reuse a capsule.
All right, our next question comes from Texas Dog Mom. Wants to know, why is it important to know exactly what food and water is consumed during reentry? It's a good question, and it really comes down to, we have a very set amount of food. And again, Dragon, not the biggest space, so it's probably hard to lose something on Dragon, but we do meticulously track everything in microgravity, just so if we are in a situation, because remember, today was the primary landing opportunity for Bob and Doug. If for some reason we had to wave off, they would still be in space for another 48 hours. And so we're always just tracking where everything is inside that capsule for the mission, not only so it's easy to find, but at the end of the mission, if we find something is missing, you have to go and find it. That's something If you think to how aircraft factories operate, anything that gets brought into the area has to be tracked, because if something is found and it hasn't been tracked previously, or if you know you brought something in and you can't find it, you have to generally stop what you're doing and go find it. So definitely important to track everything on board. Water and food was just the item of the day for them this morning as they were in their post-sleep, just wrapping up, getting their breakfast before they began their day.
And there you see a live shot of our Mission Control Center here in Hawthorne, California. Our Dragon operators are ready to begin our deorbit phase, which, again, that won't be happening for a couple hours still. But everyone is in place and ready to monitor Dragon as we approach the final steps of our re-entry phase. At this point, we're going to check in on Dragon, see where it is. It looks like it's about to go over Brazil down there in South America. So enjoy this live view of our ground track.
Dragon SpaceX for procedure 4.700 deorbit preparation. Dragon SpaceX for procedure 4.700 deorbit preparation.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Doug. Just want to clarify a couple things. So per the previous mention for Section 1, the no path is applicable because we will not be elevating loop speeds. In addition, when completing step 3.4, please be sure to untether and stow the camera caps back in location 8.
Okay, copy all. And in 3.4, you want us to take all the camera caps, untether them, and put them back in location 8. And I think our suggestion would be that we'll probably just do that now, unless you guys have a reason not to.
Hey, we agree with that plan, and that's a good readback. Appreciate it.
right. Well, we are still following along with Bob and Doug's journey back home today. Everything continuing to proceed smoothly with the departure of Dragon from the space station yesterday. They have been awake for a couple of hours now after getting their 8 hours of rest on board the Dragon capsule, and everything's really focused on the events coming up in just about 3 hours from now.
Yeah, so we have a number of things that will be happening. As Dan said, we're actually looking for our events to begin in 3 hours and 42 minutes. First, we will have claw separation, so that is deactivating or separating the trunk. The claw is the piece of hardware that delivers power and telemetry and fluids between the trunk and the Dragon capsule. In order to expose the heat shield in preparation for re-entry, we will jettison the trunk. It will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and disintegrate during that process. But once we do that, Dragon capsule will be in its final physical form prior to re-entry. We'll then initiate a deorbit burn. It'll last about 11.5 minutes, and that burn is intended to place Dragon on its final trajectory for its landing site, which is just off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. So once that deorbit burn happens, Bob and Doug will then sit back and continue to monitor all the telemetry and data that they have on their screens. That's their primary mission for today, is to just keep a tab on things. There you can see on your screen that they're now not in their suits yet. We'll wait a little bit longer before they have to don their suits, but they're there doing some checkouts and moving about the interior of Crew Dragon. Like I said, we will perform that deorbit burn, lining up the capsule for that final reentry and splashdown off the coast of Florida. And after we do the deorbit burn, we will close that nose cone. So the deorbit burn will utilize the 4 forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. We will not need to use them, and we want to for the remainder of the mission, and we want to protect that forward hatch there. That's the hatch that is used for ingress and egress, or entering and exiting the space station. And as these capsules are designed to be reusable, we definitely want to protect that hatch. So we close and lock that nose cone. And then after the nose cone is in place and we confirm that it is locked up, we then maneuver to that deorbit burn attitude. Let me rephrase that. We will perform the deorbit burn. The nose cone will close, and we will then begin the process of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. We just saw Bob kind of re-stowing his spacesuit. They keep their spacesuits, at least for this mission, in the seats on either side of them, as Bob and Doug are right there in the middle, in the commander and the pilot seat. But after they're able to successfully re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, we'll get out of that comms blackout and we'll get to the actual parachute deploys. So first we'll have 2 drogue chutes come out. Those will do the initial slowing and stabilization of the vehicle, followed shortly after by the 4 main parachutes, which are scheduled to deploy right around 11:45 a.m. Pacific. All of that sets us up for splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Florida, just a few miles away from Pensacola. That splashdown time targeted for 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 GMT or Universal Time. There to meet them is going to be the crew of the Go Navigator, which has left its port. These actually some live views from the boat itself as it continues to make its way out to the recovery zone. It was able to leave the port right at around 9:20 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. As we talked about a little bit earlier, they were tracking an issue with one of the backup generators on board the Go Navigator. They were working to try and get a replacement for that, but weren't able to get it on board quite in time. But Go Navigator still has a fully functional prime generator on board, and not having that backup is not any constraint on normal recovery options this morning. So Go Navigator steaming full speed ahead, heading to that recovery zone, and they're going to be there several hours before splashdown. They'll maintain a distance of about 3 nautical miles from the anticipated splashdown point and just be ready and on standby for when Bob and Doug are in the water.
Yeah, as you may have heard us mention before, it has been, at least over the last week, the recovery team has been really busy with trying to determine where exactly we were going to point Dragon for its return home. In order to allow for multiple departure times from the International Space Station. So again, this is just trying to line up things like crew sleep schedules and weather and just physical location as it is orbiting Earth. We identified 7 potential splashdown locations. 4 on the west coast of Florida and 3 on the east coast. And it has been priority number 1 for the last week for the recovery team to determine which of those 7 locations Bob and Doug would be splashing down at. The weather around Florida is ever changing, especially when you have something like, as we currently have, a tropical storm rolling through the area. Having that storm roll up the east coast of Florida prevented us from obviously being able to land at any of those. So selection was then narrowed down to the 4 in the Gulf of Mexico on the west coast of Florida. And we continue to evaluate the weather at designated intervals, and we were able to determine that the best location for recovery would be off the coast of Pensacola. Requirements for these landing zones are essentially that they can't be in the middle of the body of water, because the landing zone has to be close to a medical facility, and it has to be close to a port so that the recovery vessel can actually get to and from the landing site.
Yeah, and we've continued to watch the weather. We got pretty lucky with the weather that we're looking at today. We had some weather criteria that we're looking for. We have to meet those criteria in order to get basically a go condition to splash down. One of the main things we were looking at was wind speeds, which we were looking to not exceed 10 miles an hour, and winds in the splashdown zone right now just barely over 1 mile an hour. So getting extremely calm winds and very calm seas for what should be a very stable operation for this recovery today. We actually just locked in Panama City a few hours ago. Our kind of last chance to lock in an alternate site was just a little over an hour and a half ago at about 5:48 a.m. Pacific. Dragon has the capability to change alternate sites once it's in free flight, and we do have, again, 7 different splashdown locations. Just based off of the weather and everything else that we looked at, Panama City was chosen as the alternate for this opportunity. That was already looking like our best one just based off the weather, and they just locked that in a few hours ago. But everything continuing on track for this Pensacola splashdown. Go Navigator is well on its way to the splashdown location, and Bob and Doug are just a couple of hours away from that deorbit burn.
We are taking your questions this morning from Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll try to cycle through as many of them as we can get to. This question comes from Tim. What's the current distance to the ISS? Good question. Something that I find that people often assume is that the International Space Station is really, really far away, and it's actually not. It is about 250 to 300 miles above the Earth. I think when I saw a report earlier, or maybe it was actually Leah who mentioned it in the earlier broadcast, I think it's about 263 miles above the Earth's surface right now. So depending on where it is in its orbit, it might be a little higher, it might be a little lower. So it's actually not that far away. It's basically the distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco, as the crow flies, just above us. So it's really not as far as many people think. Again, this is using the hashtag AskNASA. This next question comes to us from Nicholas. How far off the coast will the capsule land? Will it be possible to see any of the action from the coastline?
Trying to find our exact distances. It varies depending on which coast that we're going to. We do stay far enough away that you wouldn't really be able to see it from the coast. Obviously, you do want to still be coming down in an area pretty far away from land to make sure you're hitting a splashdown zone, and just so you're not near any major air traffic areas, things like that, is you do have to clear air zones. We have to make sure that we have notices going out to ships not to go into a certain area. But they're just several kilometers, obviously, or several miles offshore. The Cape is the closest one. That one's typically only about 24 miles offshore. The other ones range anywhere from about 50 miles all the way up to a few hundred, just about 200 or so. When we landed Demo-1 last year, it was about 240 miles off of the Cape. So it is different depending on where you're going. But one of the things that we have in our recovery arsenal are helicopters, where Bob and Doug will get recovered by that main recovery vessel, the Go Navigator, and after they're out of the capsule and into the medical facility, a helicopter will come and land on the deck, and then it's only about a 10-minute helicopter ride from the Go Navigator back to Pensacola, where they'll be moving on to a NASA plane ready to take them over to Houston.
Yeah, so one thing to note, the capsule will be re-entering Earth's atmosphere, and we will have parachute deployment starting at about 18,000 feet above the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. Those drogue parachutes and the capsule itself.
Dragon SpaceX for timeline and recovery status update.
All right, should be getting an update up to the crew now.
Go ahead.
Okay, first off, for timeline update, we are now within 4.5 hours of splashdown for contingency planning purposes. How copy?
For splashdown, copy all.
Okay, for recovery forces, I believe Jay told you that we were working a backup generator on the recovery vessel. Unfortunately, we're unable to get that generator aboard before Go Navigator had to depart due to timing constraints. However, Go Navigator has departed and is expected to be on site at approximately 1700 UTC.
Okay, Go Navigator will be on site in time for splashdown.
Yep, good readback. And as Jay mentioned before, we're down to one generator due to the loss of the other one.
Yep, we copy.
So that was just a real quick update, giving the crew on board Dragon the latest. As you just heard, Go Navigator on its way. It's expected to be in the splashdown zone on time for their descent. Again, we're targeting a splashdown at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 GMT or Universal Time. And they talked through the generator issue. The Go Navigator is still fully equipped to safely recover the crew this afternoon or this morning, but they are down one of the generators on board. Still able to use that hydraulic lift, get Dragon up out of the water and on board. The ship itself has a full deck area where it has an A-frame on the very back of the ship, and we'll get some views from the boat throughout the operations once we get a little bit closer into the recovery zone. But that A-frame used to physically lift Dragon out of the water and onto the deck. The crew stays in their suits, in their seats the entire time they're in the water, as long as everything is following the nominal timeline, and they'll get picked up out of the water and put into the Dragon nest on the boat, eventually moved under the helideck up to a crew access platform where we'll have some people standing by to open up the hatch and assist Bob and Doug getting out.
Yeah. So just real quick, going back to the Twitter question that we had a minute ago, if action would be available to view from onshore, I just did a little bit of sleuthing, and due to the splashdown location, I do think that if you're in the Pensacola area, you might be able to spot the main parachute deployment after they inflate, those main parachutes are deployed around 6,000 feet whenever Dragon is descending, when it hits about 6,000 feet above the Earth's, above the surface of the ocean. Those main parachutes will deploy, and it takes about a minute or so for them to fully deploy out into their larger state, capturing all that airflow. But it is possible that I think that if you're in the Pensacola area and you have really keen eyes, you might be able to spot those orange and white parachutes off in the distance. Again, the capsule, from that distance would be pretty small, so no promises, but it might be worth a look. So if you're in Pensacola, take a look south and around 11:48 I've lost track of my time. 11:48 a.m. Pacific or 18:48 Universal.
Yeah, and it's on what we call an ascending approach. So if you're at Pensacola looking south, the capsule will be heading towards you from the south. It's going to be moving from southeast to southwest to northeast across the Gulf of Mexico as it makes this approach. There are also what we call descending orbits. So essentially when Dragon is traveling from the northwest down to the southeast, which would actually bring it over the U.S. before it splashed down, but we are on an ascending one today, so it's largely going to be over the Gulf the whole way in during that final descent.
Yeah. So again, we are taking your questions through Twitter this morning. Be sure to use the hashtag AskNASA, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can this morning. The next question comes to us from Andrew. He asks, why can't Dragon
SpaceX Dragon for interior cameras?
Go for SpaceX.
Yeah, Mike, could you take the interior cameras down for a few minutes?
In work.
So the crew just making a quick ask, having those interior cameras brought down. They work with the teams on the ground, a lot like those on Space Station. They have cameras in there just so they're able to get kind of rapid response to any questions that they have, any help that they need. But then obviously the astronauts getting the privacy they need when they're doing suit up or just kind of anything else where you don't need people checking in on you.
Yeah. So again, going back to this question from Andrew coming to us from the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter, why can't Dragon make a straight downward descent instead of orbiting around the world? That is a great question. You have to keep in mind that when Dragon is at the International Space Station, it is at the same velocity. It is going 17,500 miles per hour, and it is orbiting the Earth. In order to have it perform a landing of straight down, you would have to have some sort of force to stop it going from that fast. And that's really not possible due to constraints like having enough fuel and size of the capsule and all that good stuff. So
Dragon SpaceX, we should be external cameras at this time.
Thanks, Mike.
So there was that confirmation from SpaceX Core that the internal cabin cameras have been shut off. So Dragon's reentry can't be straight down because you would need some sort of force in order to stop it, thanks to, I think it's Newton's second law. That being said, an orbital reentry like we do use is highly calculable. We are able to have very precise details in terms of where it's going to land and at what time. So there really, there's no downside to doing it in the way that we do it, other than the fact that from a physics standpoint, the straight down approach isn't really possible.
All right, so our next question from Elaine, what difference is there in the route map from the red and the yellow line? I think Kate touched on this a little bit earlier. That's showing you where Dragon is essentially in sunlight or in eclipse. We don't have shades on this map, but if you look at the red parts, that's where Dragon is essentially on the dark side of the planet at that point in the orbit. And then the yellow line in the orbit is where it's in sunlight. So obviously matching up with the sunlight for all of us down on planet Earth. The sun, I think it's up here in California. There aren't many windows, but that's all that line is signaling. And you might wonder, why are there two lines, it kind of looks like. It's actually just one continuous line. And just to run you down real quick, again, Dragon is in kind of the top right portion of your screen right now. There's a little circle with the Dragon icon. It's currently just to the north of India, flying over China. It's going to continue on this southeasterly path over Southeast Asia. It's about to head into an orbital nighttime, which means things will get dark for the spacecraft and the crew on board. And that also means it's about to cross what's known as the Terminator line. That is the line between night and day on the Earth's surface. And when you're on board the International Space Station, or in this case, on board Dragon, you can get some pretty spectacular views as the Earth goes from night to almost pitch black beneath you.
Yeah, one of my favorite views that we get from the International Space Station is as they are transitioning from day to night and night to day, you get to see the sunrises and sunset from their perspective, and I just absolutely love it when we actually get to see the lightning as well. It's just such a cool phenomenon to view from above.
So we'll hang out for a few minutes here and watch Dragon's track as they continue to circle the globe. We're still about 3 hours away from things really starting to pick up when we get into trunk separation and deorbit burn, but we're going to continue to stick with it as we get ready to welcome Bob and Doug home a little bit later this morning. right, if you're just now tuning in, we're still following Bob and Doug's journey back home on the conclusion of our Demo-2 mission. Just to walk you through how we got here, everything started back on Saturday when they made their way into the Dragon spacecraft, where they had been living on board the International Space Station for about 62 days, and by the time they splashed down, they'll be just shy of 64 total days spent in space. Everything started with hatch close after Bob and Doug made their way into the Dragon spacecraft, closing up the hatch on their side. After that, they were able to get the hatch closed on the station side, closing what's known as the APAS hatch. It also had a docking target affixed to it, but that created an area between the two known as the vestibule. That vestibule gets exposed to the vacuum of space following the undocking, so we first have to depressurize it, or basically draw all of the air out. After that and some leak checks are completed, the crew gets ready for their actual departure from the International Space Station. The teams on the ground, both here in Hawthorne and in Mission Control Houston, did a go, no-go. Basically, we check everything on Dragon, everything on station, and get them ready for departure. Following a successful go for undocking, it's time to actually move Dragon away, and separation takes place. A docking command was sent, and then just about 5 minutes later, Dragon fired its thrusters in 2 small bursts to separate from the International Space Station. It then begins to fly away, and did so yesterday evening, doing 4 departure burns to bring it first up and over the International Space Station, eventually passing beneath and out in front. All 4 of those departure burns done successfully. By that point, Dragon's opening rate away from the station got larger and larger and larger until it was time for it to move into its departure phasing burn. This was one several minute long burn, about a 6 minute long burn, to fine-tune Dragon's path to its eventual splashdown site. That was conducted successfully last night after Bob and Doug had gone to sleep. And then once that departure phasing burn was in the book, we only had one more burn coming up down the line, and then we were going to get ready for this reentry. Bob and Doug did have about an 8-hour crew sleep period, as this is about a 19-hour trip door to door from space station down to the ocean off the coast of Pensacola in Florida. That crew sleep is completed. They woke up a couple of hours ago, and our more dynamic action is about to pick up soon.
Yeah, so our events coming up next will be the claw and trunk separation. This will essentially be the final, when we separate the trunk, it'll be the final physical form of Dragon prior to reentry. We will then have exposed the heat shield at the bottom of the capsule after jettisoning that trunk, allowing it to get ready for its reentry. We put a deorbit burn. We activate the deorbit burn sequence, and that puts Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing site off the coast of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. That deorbit burn will last about 11 and a half minutes. After that deorbit burn completes, we then close the nose cone. The deorbit burn will utilize the 4 thrusters at the top of Dragon, as you can see there. We no longer need to utilize them, and we want to protect the top hatch, the forward hatch there, so we close that nose cone and lock it up. After that, Dragon will begin to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and we will experience a 6-minute-long communication blackout due to the plasma building up on the exterior of cabin, due to the buildup of plasma on the exterior of Dragon. We won't be able to send commands or receive telemetry, but that's okay. Dragon is completely autonomous. It is designed to steer itself anyway. So with that blackout communication period will last for about 6 minutes or so. After that, about a couple minutes after that, after we regain those communications with the crew, we will deploy the drogue parachutes. These are designed to begin to slow the vehicle down even further, and also to stabilize the Dragon capsule. About a minute or two after drogues deploy, we'll fire off the main parachutes. So these will be 4 orange and white parachutes that will deploy and begin to catch even more air and create more air resistance, slowing the vehicle down even further to a mere 15 or 16 miles per hour as the capsule then splashes down in the Gulf of Mexico. we've located a designated landing location near Pensacola, Florida. Recovery operations then begin immediately after splashdown is confirmed. The main parachutes will be cut from the capsule autonomously, and the recovery crew will then begin to move into position in order to retrieve Bob and Doug. The team will actually be waiting 3 nautical miles away from the splashdown site. Whenever the splashdown approaches, they will then move closer. They will pull get the capsule ready to be lifted onto the recovery vessel. Once that is secure in the nest, they'll then get to open the hatch and have Bob and Doug egress or exit from the Dragon capsule. And at that moment, it'll be their first breath of fresh air in 2 months since they've launched back on Falcon 9 in late May. So we're really excited. All of that will be coming up shortly. Those events that we have in the future, that the deorbit burn and the jettison of the trunk, that will all be in like 3 hours exactly. So my countdown here shows that the trunk separation will be happening 3 hours from now. So we're looking forward to all of those events coming up. It's going to be a very exciting morning. Like I said, seeing Bob and Doug for the first time coming out from the capsule on that recovery vessel. Go Navigator will be the first time that they are getting, they're back down on planet Earth for the first time in 2 months. Safety is everything, and of course the human body experiences microgravity, and just to be safe, we will place them into a wheelchair or my mind is blanking. Stretcher, yeah, there we go.
Essentially, we'll be helping Bob and Doug as they get out of the capsule. Anybody who's familiar with our long-duration crew members returning to Earth, if you've ever seen a Soyuz landing, you've seen the crew members get physically lifted out of the capsule typically and immediately carried over to chairs where we're able to do quick medical checks, take things like pulse, a number of other items, and just really give them a moment to rest, as it can be pretty jarring on the body when you re-enter into a gravity environment after living in space for several months. So we're just doing everything we can possibly to keep them safe. Not only just physically once they get back, we've also had a lot of protocols put in place with the current environment with coronavirus, just to make sure every member of our recovery team has been self-isolated and tested prior to being in that close contact with Bob and Doug.
Yeah, so really awesome morning we have coming up. Now, with respect to the recovery ships themselves, I should say recovery ships, so there on your screen, we have live views coming to you from Go Navigator as it is making its way to the designated landing site off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. In the lower right-hand side of your screen, what you see there is the hydraulic lift that will be used to hoist Dragon out of the water and into the nest, which is just barely out of view there. But that nest is what the capsule will sit on and then be pulled more towards the interior of the deck, and that's where we'll open the hatch and have Bob and Doug come out. So as you can see, we got some blue skies with a couple of clouds. It's a picture-perfect day. Those seas look really calm. Earlier, the most recent weather report indicated that we were looking at about 1 mile per hour for winds, which is fantastic. So it's great to see those live views coming to us from Go Navigator as it is making its way towards the Pensacola, Florida recovery zone.
Yeah, you really couldn't have asked for better weather than we got today. Weather was the one thing we were really keeping a close eye on as we marched towards this splashdown today. We had a number of different checkpoints throughout the week where NASA and SpaceX were meeting, assessing the weather and our conditions, where we had to have not only our prime site with go weather conditions, but our alternate site, at least one alternate site as well. Dragon does have the capability to download to different alternate sites once it's in free flight. So we just passed a checkpoint a few hours ago where they locked in Panama City as the alternate site, and we have 7 different landing zones around Florida. 3 of them on the Atlantic side, Jacksonville, Daytona, and the Cape, were not in consideration for this weekend as they are still dealing with the tropical weather system. But were able to get great weather at Pensacola, and they're set up for that splashdown today. And Go Navigator is on its way. It left the port just about an hour and a half ago, and we've been following its progress. It had one of its backup generators was failed, and they were working to replace it with another one, but weren't able to get it there in time. But that is not a constraint to do the recovery operations. Go Navigator is still perfectly capable of effectively and safely recovering the capsule and Bob and Doug from the ocean in its current state.
Yeah. So like we mentioned before, we are taking your questions this morning through Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from Jim. He'd like to know, what are all those people in that room doing? That's a great question. That is Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. There you see all of our Dragon operators and our mission director. So those are the people that are essentially continuing to monitor Dragon. As I've mentioned before, Dragon is designed to fly itself autonomously. There are very few things that the folks in that room have to command manually. But for those things, it's a lot of data review and verifying that the conditions that need to be in place before sending said commands are achieved. But those people are essentially responsible for monitoring the health and safety and telemetry of our crew and capsule.
Yeah, mission controls are just a part of human spaceflight. This one has been in the game ever since Dragon launched. While Dragon was docked to the International Space Station, it was powered down for a lot of its time there, but they would still come in occasionally to wake Dragon up, do a bunch of checkouts, and we did a number of different tests while Dragon was docked to the International Space Station. This was just another chance to see how it integrated into the overall station system as we were passing both energy, electrical power, and data to and from Dragon while it was docked. Bob and Doug and a couple of their Expedition 63 crew members also doing a habitability study. As again, this is a test flight, so we did a bunch of demonstration flights on the way up to the station with Bob and Doug manually controlling the Dragon spacecraft. And this habitability study was something that they did while they were on board. It was largely kind of just some spatial tests where they were inside Dragon. They practiced getting in and out of their suits and doing leak checks, and they had two of their Expedition 63 crew members come and join them so they could test out sleeping arrangements. 4 people in microgravity in a Dragon capsule. So they're able to do that just, again, to give teams some real tangible, this is how we're going to do this when we're flying these full operational crews, with our first one, Crew 1, coming up as early as the end of September.
Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. Our next question comes to us from Ibrox Baby. How do they get the hatch open once Dragon has splashed down, and who will be doing it? That is a good question. So we won't be opening the hatch until Dragon is lifted out of the water and placed onto the recovery vessel. That hatch will be manually opened. The flight surgeon will actually be the first person to pop his head in and say hi to Bob and Doug while they're still strapped in, make sure they're feeling okay, that everything went well, and then we will have them unstrap and we'll help them exit from the vehicle, and then we'll have them go into their medical tent for full medical evaluation. So, really good question.
All right, our next one comes from For the Love of Tennis. Said, when the shuttle returned from space, you could hear a sonic boom. Will that happen with Dragon? As far as I know, no. That will not happen, I don't believe. But I'm not entirely sure. I know that nobody will likely hear it if it does happen this time, as Dragon's going to be passing over the Gulf for its entire descent through that final after deorbit burn and actually passing through the Earth's atmosphere. So if it happened, it would happen out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, where it would be very unlikely. I'm not sure, though. We'll come back to this one a little bit later and get you an answer on that. Our next one comes from Lakin, who wants to know, will Bob and Doug be able to feel splashdown or feel the capsule rocking in the water? I think the answer to this is an unequivocal yes.
Yeah.
They'll be touching down at about 16 miles an hour, which is vastly slower than that 17,500 miles an hour they're going right now in orbit, but still enough that they'll feel a bit of a jolt. Some of the Soyuz landings, which might be a little bit rougher, but those use soft landing engines, and a lot of astronauts kind of compare those to being almost like a minor car crash, because you are still strapped into a seat, and then you're kind of hitting into something. So they'll definitely feel that, and they have been talking about their expectations for rocking in the water. They've been a little graphic at times at what they think they might experience with seasickness once they get down, but as they've told us, there's only one way to find out, but they're prepared for it nonetheless.
Yeah. Given the fact that they have both flown on shuttle missions previously and they are both test pilots, Bob and Doug have gone through extensive physical training for all of their missions, including this one. I have mentioned before that the Gs that we're expecting to encounter during re-entry is around 4 Gs. We also saw about 4 Gs during the launch portion of the mission. So this really shouldn't be anything too different from what they've experienced previously. For a point of reference to those of us that haven't been to space, there are many roller coasters across the world that deliver 4 Gs or more throughout the ride or at one point or another. So it's safe to say that 4 Gs might sound like a lot for those of us that haven't been to space. It's actually just kind of like a moderately intense roller coaster. So we can expect that they will feel the splashdown, and they will feel the rocking a little bit. If there are waves, the most recent weather report indicated that the waves weren't going to be too bad. So all in all, we are expecting it to be a pretty comfortable touchdown for Bob and Doug on their return home to Earth. Our next question comes from Terry and his dog. At what speed will the capsule hit the water? Great question. So we are anticipating about 15 or 16 miles per hour will be the speed when the capsule touches down in the Gulf of Mexico. Like we said before, we're targeting just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. That is where Go Navigator, our recovery ship, is en route to. And when the capsule is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, the atmosphere itself is helping to slow it down. We will deploy parachutes to help further slow it down. And by the time it hits the top of the ocean, it's only going 15 or 16 miles per hour.
All right. Our next question comes from Ezekiel, who asks one that I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about real soon. How do we get to buy tickets soon for traveling to the International Space Station? That, good timing, as that is something we're looking at in the not too distant future. NASA recently committed to supporting at least 2 private astronaut missions a year to the International Space Station. There are a number of companies, SpaceX included, that have been working to kind of develop the capability to fly private citizens, non-government astronauts into space and potentially to the International Space Station. So I would say definitely follow the industry, keep an eye out. The prices will likely be a little bit high at first, especially for most of us, but that really is a major goal right now of a lot of space travel, is to try and open it up to those who aren't necessarily just governments. Space travel for so long has just been the realm of governments who would have the budgets to do these kinds of things, and we've seen basically an explosion of commercial activity in low Earth orbit. The International Space Station's been kind of the cornerstone of enabling that entire market with a marketplace and a capability for research and transportation and a number of other things, and we work with a lot of partners in the space industry to try and just grow that even more.
Yeah. Another question comes to us from Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. This one comes to us from Chris. How airtight is the ISS? Well, I think it's safe to say that the ISS, the International Space Station, is completely airtight. Given the fact that it is orbiting Earth in the vacuum of space, it has to be airtight in order to make sure that the crew is safe throughout their stay on station.
Yeah, it is essentially airtight. There is enough that you will get a tiny little bit of leak sometimes through seals. So it's never anything where you'll be sucked up against the side of a hatch or anything like that. But just because making something perfectly vacuum proof is extremely hard, especially when you have so many interconnecting parts. That's why we do occasionally have to inject additional breathing gases into the space station atmosphere. We actually deliver them in these super densified spheres called NORS tanks, nitrogen and oxygen regeneration system, just to kind of top off the atmosphere inside of the International Space Station. But great question. Well, let's do one more from Andrea. Why are spacecraft usually painted white?
That is a good question. So, generally speaking, a lot of it comes down to preference. All SpaceX vehicles, our operational vehicles, are black and white. Of course, Starship currently is silver. But as of right, that's still in development. But all of our operational vehicles are black or white. And in this case, it just so happens that in order to conform to that aesthetic, the paint that we use, the thermal protective paint, on top of those panels on the exterior of the capsule, we make it white.
And a lot of other things are white exactly for the reason Kate just said, is those thermal properties. When you're in outer space, the only way you can really heat up or absorb heat or reject heat is through radiation. And if you are a black surface, it's just like down here on planet Earth. If you wear a black shirt and you feel hotter, that's because your shirt is basically absorbing more of that infrared radiation. So to help keep things cooler, essentially, you can paint them white with these reflective or very low albedo coatings, and that can help maintain a better thermal. We have a lot of things we call thermal blankets, which are just essentially white fabrics that will cover up metallic areas of the space station that would otherwise get really hot in direct sunlight, that you can keep cool just with that white color. Great question, though.
Again, we are taking your questions through the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter, so be sure to continue to submit those. We'll try to get to as many as we can throughout the morning.
And for now, we're just going to continue to watch Bob and Doug as they zip around planet Earth. We are a little less than 3 hours away now from things really starting to pick up. We're going to be looking for all of those events that we talked through, starting with that trunk separation coming up soon, and everything's still on track for a splashdown today at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. So stay tuned.
Dragon SpaceX for 4.700.
Go ahead, SpaceX.
Okay, Doug, we're just a couple minutes into the planned suit donning time. I wanted to give you guys a go for all sections of 4.700 deorbit preparation. We are standing by to support suit don.
Okay, copy that. We are through section 3, and we'll report the status of the inventory here in a few minutes, and copy go for suit donning. And just as a status for that, we are in our comfort garments and our orthostatic garments, and we have started the fluid loading protocol.
Okay, SpaceX copies. We'll listen up for that inventory in a few minutes, and you got your comfort garments, orthostatic garments, and have started fluid loading. Thank you for the update.
All right, so we just heard a call up to the crew as they're getting into some of their activities to get ready for this deorbit burn. So they're about to get suited up. We heard they're in their comfort garments, so those are essentially the black athletic clothes that they're going to wear as the base layer underneath their suits. They're also in what they called orthostatic garments, and those are essentially compression pants or compression shorts that they're wearing, and that helps to kind of squeeze or that helps to kind of increase the blood flow as they're going to be going from all of the fluids and they're being up around their head to being back in a gravity situation where your blood, everything kind of pools around your legs just due to the pull of gravity. These garments kind of squeeze the legs and force some of that blood back up, so it's not as kind of a jarring of a transition from the fluid shift happening. So they're doing that to prepare for their readaptation to gravity. Also doing fluid loading, which has been just shown to help with orthostatic intolerance. So essentially they won't feel as dizzy or disoriented once they get back down. It helps by actually increasing the amount of plasma in the blood even for once they re-enter gravity. So all that going on board right now on Dragon.
Yeah, so it's exciting to hear that they are beginning to enter the last phases that they as crew members need to complete prior to re-entry. We're about 2 hours and 20 minutes away from the next physical milestone in terms of the vehicle itself. We'll have what's known as claw separation, and that's where the mechanism that basically contains the umbilicals for power and telemetry and fluids between the trunk and the capsule, we will separate that in order to allow us to jettison the trunk. By doing so, the heat shield of the capsule will be exposed and allowing Dragon to be ready for re-entry. A couple minutes after we jettison the trunk away from the capsule, we will then maneuver the capsule into a position to allow for it to perform the deorbit burn. This will be the burn that places Dragon on its final trajectory. We are aiming for the Gulf of Mexico today, specifically off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, is our designated landing zone. After the deorbit burn completes, which we're expecting that to be about 11 and a half minutes, we will then close the nose cone and lock it. And then a couple minutes after that completes, we'll begin to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and things will start to get pretty hot.
Yeah, and everything is going to be standing by in the recovery zone once they're done with that deorbit burn, that re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere, and eventually landing under parachutes. This is a live view from the Go Navigator, which is still making its way out to the recovery zone. It left port just a few hours ago, just about 2 hours and 10 minutes ago. making its way out from Pensacola to the anticipated splashdown zone. It's going to be on station about 3 nautical miles away from the anticipated splashdown site, at which point it'll take it just around 30 minutes to close in on the capsule following the splashdown. As we did discuss earlier, that was pretty much the only issue that had come up so far today, was with a backup generator on the Go Navigator. They were not able to get a replacement one on board in time, but all the flight rules still enable us to go through with this operation. Go Navigator with its primary generator still fully capable of effecting a recovery this morning.
Yeah, so that recovery time, we're looking at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. So if you want to take a nap, you have a couple of hours before the action really kicks in. But we will continue to be bringing you coverage throughout the entire mission. Hopefully we'll have some more great views from Go Navigator, our recovery ship making its way to the splashdown location. Like we said before, the recovery vessel is currently carrying about 40 people. They all have, it's actually a combination of SpaceX and NASA people. They all have specific jobs, and whenever we are actually performing the recovery operations, you only see a small handful of those individuals on board, because safety is the top priority, not only for Bob and Doug, but also for the personnel on board. So we'll make sure that unnecessary personnel will be away and in one of the back rooms, whereas the operational deck during active recovery mission or during active recovery operations will have those key personnel involved. And we will be able to see the descent all the way through splashdown, as well as the fast boat approach. So those are the 2 smaller boats that make their way to Dragon after it splashes down. They're the ones that are doing the initial preparation of the capsule, preparing it to be lifted out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. So we have quite a bit coming up, and we're looking forward to being able to show you all of that. As I've mentioned before, the recovery team is a newer one here at SpaceX, since the whole crew recovery process is newer, and it's really cool that we get to showcase them a little bit. The last time we were able to do so was about a year ago, year and a half almost, and on the Demo-1 mission. So be sure to stay tuned throughout the entire recovery process, because once the capsule is lifted up and out of the water and is secured to the deck of the ship, that will be our first opportunity to hopefully get a couple thumbs up from Bob and Doug, indicating that they're feeling good after their return.
Yeah, we expect it to take about an hour from splashdown to them getting out of the capsule. A lot of it will be those initial checks happening in the opening minutes following splashdown, and it'll take about 30 minutes for the primary vessel, the Go Navigator, to get very close to the Dragon capsule itself. And then once it's there, it'll take only a few more minutes to lift it up onto the boat and then move it on that nest towards the crew recovery platform. So it's a platform with enough space for just a couple of people underneath the helipad on board the Go Navigator, where they'll be able to open up the hatch. SpaceX's Anil Menon, one of the flight surgeons that works here, is going to be the first one through the hatch. He'll do a quick check on Bob and Doug, making sure they're ready to come out, and then we'll be assisting them out of the capsule and immediately over into a medical facility on board. They'll be on there for just a little while, and then we'll look to land a helicopter on board the ship, and then they'll catch a quick flight back to Pensacola.
Yeah, so after that, they'll also then be transplanted by airplane back to Houston after they complete those checkouts at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And then the best part of the day, family reunions. So I'm sure Bob and Doug are looking forward to being able to give their family hugs again in less than 24 hours. If you were tuned in earlier in the webcast, you may have caught the special wake-up message sent to Bob and Doug to bring them out of their sleep phase. It was nothing short of precious and adorable, a message from both of their sons. They each have one son, and it was a nice little audio recording saying, "Daddy, wake up, wake up, wake up." So highly encourage you to check it out, because it is certainly heartwarming and quite a special opportunity to be able to share a moment like that with their family from far away.
And they were pretty adamant. It's a good thing we have weather, because it sounds like those kids are expecting their dads home today. think one of them's got to go get a dog, so he's excited.
That's what it sounds like.
But everything's gone extremely smoothly with Dragon's flight. It all started yesterday on Saturday when they loaded in and departed the International Space Station. Since then, we've had a series of steps, all executed flawlessly. We haven't had any issues tracked with Dragon during the departure and the setup for splashdown. Again, today, this is our prime location. This is our prime opportunity. So once we undock from station, Dragon had an identified prime and a backup, the alternate, which was several days later. If we were unable to land today, we would target a different site 48 hours later. It's actually about 47 hours from the initial splashdown target to the secondary. And that secondary was locked in a few hours ago as Panama City. But everything's looking great with the weather today. As we talked through, we had constraints of about 10 miles an hour for the wind, and our initial weather report last night, we were about a mile an hour, and we just got upgraded to about 2 miles an hour.
That is correct.
Winds have doubled, but when you go from 1 to 2 miles an hour, we're still well within the limits. So still looking forward to an on time and a good splashdown today.
Yeah, the other good news coming out of that most recent weather report is that the waves are also looking really calm. The threshold for the waves is based on how high the wave is going to get and how frequently. So waves occur in this type of pattern, and for safety reasons, we can't have high waves or waves at a certain height occurring very frequently. That makes recovery operations dangerous. And we're pleased to report that the last information that we got regarding the weather anticipated at splashdown are very small waves. I've pulled up here real quick. It was something like, here we go. Just half a foot occurring every 6 seconds. So you can basically think of it as if your ocean baseline is here, every 6 seconds if your ocean baseline is here, every 6 seconds, your wave comes up a half a foot every 6 seconds. So really calm. So we're really happy to see that while unfortunately the weather in the Atlantic Ocean landing zones wasn't really cooperating, we're very happy to report that the anticipated weather for splashdown today is going to be mild, and based on the views that we were seeing from Go Navigator earlier, quite the picture-perfect day.
And weather is something that we track very closely. If you've been following the mission since May, weather was definitely in the conversation back when we launched, where we had to scrub the first attempt just due to some bad weather that moved into the area. But we're able to just kind of pinpoint right between some clouds for that second launch attempt on May 30th. And then we were watching it extremely closely today, too, or even in the lead up to where we are today. And we're going to continue to have weather checkpoints all the way up until about an hour and a half before landing. That's really the final opportunity we have to wave off. And we actually have a question from Twitter. Just a reminder, use the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter, and we'll try to get to your question throughout the morning. And this one from Demi wanted to know, if the splashdown were to be scrubbed, could Dragon go back to ISS, or could they be in the orbit on their own? For this mission, we don't have a plan essentially to re-rendezvous with the International Space Station. We weren't going to undock until we had good weather at a prime and alternate location. Both were go at the time that we left. So if for some reason we had to wave off within the next hour or so from Pensacola, Dragon would continue in its orbit. It would make some adjustments over the next 47 hours, and then we would target a splashdown at Panama City. We had to lock in that alternate site just a few hours ago. Up until that point, for the first about 12 hours or so, Dragon has the ability to change alternate sites, so we could have targeted one of the other Gulf sites, potentially even going back to Pensacola on the second 2 days later, but we were able to lock in Panama City. And not anticipating to need that, but Dragon does have the ability to wave off and kind of reattempt a splashdown 2 days later.
Yeah, as we've mentioned earlier, Dragon will be performing a deorbit burn. That'll last 11 and a half minutes. That deorbit burn is the moment where we are sending Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing zone. That deorbit burn maneuvering is performed a little bit less than an hour prior to splashdown itself. So like Dan said, definitely continuing to monitor weather until the very last moment that we can. But there is a little bit of flexibility there in terms of if we have to wave off for 24 or 48 hours, Bob and Doug would remain in the capsule.
All right, our next question comes from Cody Bone O'Brien, who wanted to know, what were Bob and Doug doing in space? Well, they spent 62 days on board the International Space Station as crew members of Expedition 63, and they were fully fledged crew members, so they kind of did the full gamut of space station operations. They did everything from executing science, contributing more than 100 hours of their time to executing science experiments on board from pretty much every discipline we have on there, from biology to technology demonstrations, to just learning more about the human body and how it adapts to spaceflight. Bob Behnken was part of 4 spacewalks along with Chris Cassidy. The two of them both now have 10 spacewalks in their careers, ties them with Mike Lopez Alegria and Peggy Whitson as the most for U.S. astronauts. So they were extremely busy while they were on the space station. I know Chris Cassidy was happy to have some help on board, as it's just been him and his 2 Russian cosmonauts for the last several months, and they're kind of back in that situation now, and that's why we're really looking forward to Crew 1 coming up this fall.
Yeah, days on the International Space Station, in addition to spacewalks and performing science experiments, you also have to eat, you have to sleep, and you have to exercise. So it's really easy to see how whenever there are only a couple of people on the International Space Station, that things that are, exercise, eating, and sleeping are absolutely essential. Exercise helps to keep the body strong and try to prevent the effects of that microgravity has on the human body. So when it comes to what might get shifted out a little bit, it's not exercise, it's not eating, it's not sleeping, and so having 2 extra hands on board to assist with things like spacewalks and being able to perform some of the science on board was definitely a help. But in addition to that, Bob and Doug were also completing mission objectives related to Demo-2 while it was docked, making sure that the battery life was as expected, making sure that the solar panels were still absorbing and generating power as expected. So I am sure that by the time that they get home, they will be pretty tired, not just from, the dynamic events happening today, but just from the last 2 months as a whole. I'm getting tired just thinking about it.
Ready for a break, yeah. All right, our next question comes from Philip Hartman, who wants to know, how much training does it take to be able to operate, control all of the technology on Dragon and the things on Space Station? I can touch on the space station stuff. We typically train crew members for about 2 years. We've had a couple that kind of cram in that training a little bit shorter than that, but typically crew members get assigned about 2 years out and spend that entire time training just to do day-to-day tasks on board the space station. I mean, that's everything from just operating the basic facilities, learning how to repair all of the major pieces of hardware, like the thing that generates your oxygen or scrubs the carbon dioxide, how the water recycling system works. They get kind of crash courses in operating a bunch of different science hardware that's on board the space station. You kind of have to become a jack of all trades when you're up there, because one day you're a mechanic, the next day you're a physicist, the next day you're spacewalking, and so they get a whole bunch of training that they have to take, and it's done all over the world too.
Yeah, definitely can't call a handyman when something goes wrong. You are the handyman. The next question comes to us from Abby. Again, this is the hashtag Ask NASA on Twitter. This may be a silly question, but is there a telescope on the ISS that the crew can use?
They don't have a telescope. They don't actually have very many windows that look up at the stars. We have a number of science experiments that are on the International Space Station that use its position outside of the Earth's atmosphere to look kind of beyond our solar system. We have some that aren't necessarily telescopes, but like the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, which is looking for signs of dark matter. And then we have one that was a Japanese payload. The name is escaping me, but it was essentially looking for pulsars throughout the universe, and was really cool. It was essentially developing a futuristic version of GPS, where it was looking to develop a system or a map where you could use pulsars, some of the brightest objects in the universe, to navigate. And obviously that's not something we need to worry about right now because we're not leaving our solar system anytime soon. But we're already learning how to do that, and we're using the International Space Station to do it. They have some big lenses for their cameras, but those are pretty much pointed back down towards Earth. Our next question wanted to know, how does the communication to Dragon work? Is it done through satellites?
Partially, yes. If you think about the International Space Station orbiting Earth, it technically is considered a satellite as well as a spaceship.
Really big one.
Yeah. And then we also have ground stations across the world that are able to provide uplinks and downlinks from the station, as well as from Dragon capsule itself. So we try to make all of those connections as direct as possible to us here in Mission Control, for trying to reduce latency and making sure that we get high quality feeds. So we try to avoid ping-ponging as much as possible. But yeah, there are a number of ways, but generally speaking, we go from capsule to ground in as short of a distance as possible.
All right, our next one comes from Juliet, who wants to know, does NASA have a full-size mock-up of the space station in a training facility? We have several, actually. We have a building called the Space Vehicle Mock-Up Facility at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where we have a full-size mock-up of every single habitable module. So that's essentially saying every single module you can actually go inside. There's a huge part of the space station itself that's just external, that isn't pressurized, and the astronauts only really see when they're spacewalking. So to familiarize them with that part, we have a full-size mock-up in the bottom of our swimming pool, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, a 40-foot deep pool. They practice how to spacewalk. So we have several, and they're typically of kind of different fidelity is what we call them. So you'll have some that have real racks, real science hardware, real oxygen generation system built in, and then you'll have some that are just kind of representative of them. They'll be full-size, but they might have like a printed poster of what's on the wall here. But you can still use things like that for emergency training. We really try to do as much training on the ground, and I know we do the same in Dragon, in something that's lifelike for what they're about to be flying on once they're in space. So by the time that they get there, a lot of your actions just feel like reflex.
So at this point, we're going to check in on Dragon. Looks like it is about to go over Eastern Europe. We're going to show our ground track here and allow you to follow along. We still have, let me check my timer here. We still have 2 hours and 1 minute until our major milestone begins. That will be the claw separation and preparation to jettison the trunk. Again, that's coming up in 2 hours and 1 minute at 10:51 a.m. Pacific or 18:51 Universal. So stay with us and enjoy watching Dragon traverse the Earth.
SpaceX Dragon for inventory after fluid loading.
Okay, SpaceX is ready to copy fluid inventory after fluid loading.
Okay, from location 10, 2 additional bottles were consumed from bag 207 and 1 from bag 206. So that leaves 208 empty, 207 empty, and 206 with 2 remaining. From location 9, 3 bottles were consumed from 203. So that leaves 203 and 204 as empties. Everything else is per the packing plan.
Okay, thanks for the update. Looks like bag 207 consumed 2 bottles, 206 consumed 1 bottle, 208, 207 are empty, and 206 has 2 remaining. And then from location 9, we copy 2 bottles from 203, I believe, and that means 203 and 204 empty, the rest per packing plan.
From location 9, 203 and 204 are empty, and everything else is per the packing plan.
Okay, copy location 9, correction, 203 and 204 empty, the rest in location 9 per the packing plan.
Good, we're back.
And just one more sanity check, Bob. Could you just tell us the total number of bottles consumed?
Let me try to do the math from my notes here. I believe since departing station, we've consumed 13 bottles.
Okay, copy. 13 bottles. We'll reconcile our records down here and let you know if we got any questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Solo. And we're about to close out locations 9 and 10 and be suited, and so it's not going to be practical to go back and re-inventory anything if there's any questions after about 3 minutes. So please let us know if you can early.
Okay, copy. And actually, we do have a question for location 10, bag 206. Can you please read back the quantity there remaining?
Okay, let me unstow that bag. It looks like I made a mistake. I thought they had 3 bottles in each one, and I just reported 1 was removed. We'll have to unstow the bag to count the quantity inside of 206.
We have a pretty good readout, Bob, that 206 started at 5 bottles. So if you know you took 2 out of there, we can call that one 3.
No, from 206, we took a single bottle out. So let me count them for you.
Okay, thanks for that double check.
And in location 206, there are 4 bottles remaining.
Okay, 4 bottles remaining in 206. That math makes better sense to us. Appreciate it.
right. Well, we are still just getting closer and closer to things really picking up as Bob and Doug get ready to hit the final phase of their flight back to Earth and the end of this Demo-2 mission. Still have a couple of milestones to go, but I mean, everything picked up when we departed the space station yesterday, and it's been a pretty smooth ride so far. So everything really kicked off back on Saturday as on their 62nd day on board the International Space Station and their 63rd day in space, Bob and Doug began to get the capsule ready for their ride home. Everything picked up when they got all of the final cargo into the Dragon capsule and then got themselves in and then closed that hatch, crawling in through the top hatch to the Dragon spacecraft, getting suited up shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, on the station side, Station Commander Chris Cassidy closed the A-Pass hatch, creating what is known as the vestibule, a space between the two hatches that would be exposed to vacuum following undocking. Then we use valves on the Dragon side to draw the air out of that vestibule in a depressurization step, bringing it down to vacuum and getting it ready for that eventual physical separation or undocking. After that was complete, the teams down here on the ground, both in MCCX right behind us in Hawthorne and in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, did a go-no-go for undocking, making sure everything was good with systems on board Dragon and the health of the International Space Station. Following that go-no-go, we had a successful separation with Dragon using Draco thrusters around its service section to physically separate from the International Space Station. After hooks had driven back that were holding it in place, it executed those two quick burns. Then it was on to 4 departure burns spread over a number of hours, initially taking Dragon up and over the International Space Station, which brought it behind, and then after it lowered its orbit beneath the station, eventually bringing it out in front. Following all of those successful departure burns, it was just about time for the crew to get some sleep. And actually, during their sleep period, we were able to do what's known as the departure phasing burn. It's a little off in this timeline as it actually switched in the final hours leading up, but that departure...
Dragon SpaceX, we have you loud and clear for suited comm check.
I read you the same.
Just pausing that timeline as the crew in their suit-up steps, they just did a comm check. So they have communications run through the umbilical in their seats directly into their suits where they're able to maintain that conversation with the ground. We heard a little bit of chatters a few minutes ago as they were finishing up that fluid loading. Again, that's done to help with combating orthostatic intolerance. And to put it simply, that's dizziness in most people. Fluid loading can actually help your body react to what's typically a rush of blood away from the head once you get back down in a gravity environment, which can make you extremely dizzy. So fluid loading, you can actually up the amount of plasma in your blood, and that just helps kind of minimize that. They're also wearing what's known as an orthostatic garment, essentially compression pants that's squeezing their legs and forcing some of that fluid from the legs up towards the upper part of their body. So everything's continuing to proceed. They're suited up inside Dragon for the second time in the last 24 hours as we get ready for this deorbit.
Yeah, there on your screen you can see a shot of our Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Those folks there are our Dragon operators, our technical experts that continue to monitor the data and telemetry coming down from Dragon, not only about the vehicle, but of the crew themselves, continuing to make sure that everything is going well and just making sure that we are green or go to step into the next major milestones that we have coming up. At this point, we're about an hour and a half away from that. Those milestones will begin with the claw separation, which is when we initiate the jettison of the trunk. In order to expose the heat shield underneath the capsule, we need to let the trunk go away. So we separate the two. That trunk will actually re-enter the Earth's the trunk will actually re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and it'll disintegrate upon doing so. Oh, we got our nice little animation back here, so I'll toss it back over to Dan.
Yeah, we did that departure phasing burn. That's what really kind of set us up on our pathway towards where we are today. And then the crew did have a sleep period. As again, this was about a 19-hour phasing or a 19-hour trip from the station to the splashdown. And then as Kate was saying, we're almost up to claw and trunk separation.
Yeah, so at 10:51 a.m. Pacific or 18:51 United time or Universal time, we will have that claw and trunk separation, which, like I said before, will basically allow us to expose the heat shield and prepare us to execute the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is intended to place Dragon on its final trajectory to its landing zone, which, as we have mentioned before, it's determined to be off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. The deorbit burn will last about 11 and a half minutes. After doing so, we will close and lock the nose cone. We do this in order to protect the forward hatch located there at the top of the capsule. And we do that after the deorbit burn because the thrusters located there in the forward bulkhead are what we use to actually perform the deorbit burn. So once that nose cone is closed, we enter a 6-minute long communication blackout. This is because we are re-entering the atmosphere. As we encounter that atmosphere and friction builds up, plasma builds up on the external sides of the capsule, creating a barrier essentially where we can't command the capsule or receive telemetry. However, Dragon is completely autonomous, so totally fine. It's driving itself at that point anyway. So we will then, like I said, that blackout period lasts for 6 minutes. A couple minutes after that, we will deploy the drogue parachutes. Drogue parachutes are used for a couple of reasons. One, to help slow the vehicle down further before we deploy the main parachutes, as well as to stabilize the vehicle. About a minute after the drogue parachute deployment, we will deploy the 4 main parachutes. If you watched our Demo-1 splashdown, those are big, beautiful orange and white parachutes, and those further decelerate the vehicle down to a mere 15 or 16 miles per hour. That's the speed that they'll be going when they splash down in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, we're targeting just off the east coast of Florida near Pensacola. Once splashdown is confirmed and we cut the main parachutes away so they don't pull the capsule, recovery operations begin immediately. So that entails essentially getting the capsule out of the water and lifting it onto the recovery vessel. And once that is all secure, we open the hatch and we get our first glimpse of Bob and Doug back here on planet Earth for the first time since they launched on Falcon 9 back in late May. So that particular moment will be the first time they get to breathe fresh air, and we're looking forward to getting some thumbs up from them whenever we see them exit the capsule.
And everything's lining up for an on-time splashdown and recovery. We've been following the progress of Go Navigator as it makes its way out to the recovery zone. It left its port in Pensacola just a few hours ago, and we're tracking that it should be arriving on station just about at the top of this current hour. So it'll be there in advance of all of the upcoming hardware milestones where we get into trunk step and everything like that. So it'll be there and ready with the operational teams, a little over 40 personnel on board from SpaceX and NASA ready to assist in the recovery of the capsule and getting Bob and Doug home.
Yeah. So as those mission controllers there in our mission control center here, just to my left, continue to monitor Dragon's health, we continue to monitor Twitter for your questions. We're using the hashtag AskNASA, and we're trying to get through to as many questions as possible this morning. Our next question comes to us from Jackie. The question is, what is the name of the Dragon recovery vessel that's sailing to the splashdown location? Great question, especially because we actually have 2. The one that we are utilizing today is Go Navigator. This recovery ship is for all of our of all of the splashdown locations on the west coast of Florida. So any potential splashdown location in the Gulf of Mexico is serviced by Go Navigator. For our East Coast landing sites, which we will not be attempting today, we use Go Searcher. Both the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher are identical. They have fully functional recovery platform as well as medical bays. So it's really nice that we're able to assist the departure process. So departing the International Space Station, it's really great that we're able to assist that departure process by allowing for more opportunities for departure by having more landing sites. So today we are using Go Navigator, and it departed for the landing zone about 2.5 hours ago, I think, at this point. And it is en route to the designated landing zone just off the coast of Pensacola.
All right, and our next question comes from Takur, who wanted to know, what's the importance of inventory check during the splashdown? If you were just listening a few minutes ago, you heard Bob and Doug going through a wide range of inventory checks, and a lot of it was their food and water.